That's it? No video?
That's it.
What kind of an operation is this, Hunley?
I don't know. You just got to watch out for the staff. They get distracted. It's a holiday, Valentine's Day. They got a wife who's saying, hey, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? Pay attention. What are you doing?
It's a big day for the ladies, isn't it?
Yes. Yes, it is. Let's see. Hopefully everybody can see us in all locations. If you don't mind, locals, folks, please just say if you could see us. Good, whatever. I think we're good on Rumble, but I need to double check that. Yep, I see ours. So good on Rumble, good on YouTube. Coming in on locals. Otto says unfortunately. So okay. Yeah, he said he's put on this earth to bust my balls. It's like, thank you very much.
He's a good guy, though. He's a good guy.
He's a good guy. He's a prime ball buster.
Right. But sometimes he's irritated by the ankle bracelet.
Might be that. You're right. The chafing
can get to you. And then the batteries run out and you got to call your roll.
It's true. Yeah. It's true. Yeah. Never know, who we're going to have in our audience. Some scary folks. Show our names. Yeah. Look at that. Now people know who we are. Didn't have our labels on.
Oh, we need the labels, Hunley.
Absolutely. I don't know who the hell I'm hanging out with now.
Right. So who is watching the show today? You're saying everybody's got a Valentine's Day thing, or?
Yep. Everybody has Valentine's Day going, including me. So it can't be a long show. Barnes apparently is going to be doing Bourbon with Barnes right now, or at 6:00. So probably not as big of a crowd. But okay. That's why we have replay.
Right. Instant replay.
That's right. And it's a subject that's been around for 60 years. So yeah, I guess people can catch up.
Yeah. No, some of them you can't do it. Like on Jimmy Dore, it's live. You can't rewind. How does that work?
I think you can set it that way, but I don't do that because it just feels like a really jerk move to do it.
Yeah, it sounds jerky. Like he doesn't want you to rewind it. I guess I don't understand the whole thing, but
I know he splits it up later and then puts it out, and I get it. That's fine, but I figure that I let it go as it is, and if they can rewind it, some people will come late and watch it double speed until they catch up, and then they're watching it live.
Yeah. So, I've heard of that. I've heard of that.
I mean, why not? Why not let people do that? All right, turn off auto tracking. So, who are we discussing today?
This guy, I guess, will get a Kennedy trading card at some point, right? Like they're all going to get a trading card.
They are, yes.
Right. So this will have a trading card. Dr. Charles Crenshaw, the medical doctor.
Yep. And there's my thumbnail for today. He's the guy on the left.
That's Crenshaw. Yeah, it's a third-year medical student at Parkland when he came in there with Malcolm Perry. I think it was a second-year student. I think there was about 10 doctors when he was rolled in there, JFK. Just focusing on the JFK one for a moment. His job, Crenshaw, was to put a catheter into actually he took off JFK's pants. He tore them off, and was able to put a catheter into his leg, I believe, with a ringer solution, as they call it. And most of the other doctors were working up north near the head, because that's where the wounds were. But he was working. Is this all of the doctors together or something?
Yes. Yeah. Just in case you want to, talk about anybody or whatever.
Right. Well, there's a few we're going to talk about, but I don't know who's who there, but yeah, there were a lot of doctors, and Charles Crenshaw was one of them. And Crenshaw, actually, interestingly enough, when it was all over, he actually stroked the hair of JFK when he was alone with the body at the end. He was so deeply bereaved by what he had seen and experienced. They were all crushed. I mean, all of them were crushed. They were trying to hold back tears when JFK was pronounced dead. by Huber, the minister who was there. They were, yeah, I mean, they were exhausted. They were emotionally, physically, mentally exhausted from working on JFK for an hour, trying to save his life to no avail. I mean, they had one of the most advanced state-of-the-art trauma rooms in the country. They put them in Trauma Room 1, which is one of the most advanced in the country. And these guys were not rubes by any stretch. This is Trauma Room 1. These were the most, they had seen, even Crenshaw as a third-year intern, had seen and dealt with hundreds of bullet wounds. All of them had dealt with hundreds and hundreds of bullet wounds as trauma surgeons, Eric. You know, I mean, these were the most experienced guys in the country.
Well, and not only that, I'm going to just take a guess, but a lot of them probably were vets and had dealt with actual war wounds, wounds, coming from the front, World War II and on.
Crenshaw was 30 in 1963, so he
not was, him, but the old, the older,
the older guys. Yeah, there was some older gentlemen there. Perry was not one of them, but I mean, Malcolm Perry is the one you see in some of the press conferences, not to be confused. That's Perry a number of years later. He ends up, I think, in Washington State, where he talks to a fellow surgeon at some point in the middle of the night in like 1995 or something. He talks to another doctor who he was working with repeatedly on surgeries, and they would sit in the cafeteria after having coffee and kibitzing. And at that point, he had been asked by this doctor numerous times about the wound to the throat that Perry had done the tracheotomy on JFK's throat. And at that point in that evening, this doctor says that Perry finally said to him, that's the extended tracheotomy, by the way. The bullet hole in the throat, as Eric and I had indicated in the Dallas episode, we believe came from the trestle, small caliber, possibly a 22, does not traverse, does not come out the back of the neck, does not exit the body, goes in right there at the throat. You see JFK grasping his throat in the Zapruder film, one of the first early visible movement of his hands, and the small caliber hole that's left, the entrance hole, was extended by Perry, who Charles Crenshaw said was a master surgeon with a knife, with a scalpel, and he would never have extended it to that size. In other words, that size for that tracheotomy is about 5 times the normal size of a tracheotomy that you just showed. Crenshaw, upon seeing that, immediately said somebody extended that wound. And the tracheotomy, when you see the little device, you can't have it that open. The device is this big that goes into the hole.
Because it's got a seal.
It's got a seal. Right. So Crenshaw said that, and he said that would never seal. Somebody stretched out or cut that wound open to make it look like a gaping exit wound. And that was not what they saw when the body was brought in. It was literally a pinhole, Eric, the size of a 22 caliber bullet in the throat. And in that entrance wound, you'll see it right there.
6 millimeters entrance room, low in the neck.
Mm-hmm. So that wound that was there, Perry and the rest of them saw that as an opportunity to put a trach in there. And the trach goes in by Perry, who extends that a little bit with a razor knife, a tiny bit, to allow the device to go into the throat for breathing. Now, that being said, Perry will then deny he ever said that. Perry will then be approached by a big Secret Service agent named Elmer Moore, who we discussed and showed pictures of in a previous episode. Elmer Moore was the enforcer among the Secret Service, and Elmer Moore was given orders by Inspector Thomas Kelly. There's Elmer Moore on the extreme left.
Big, scary looking dude.
Yeah. He was the muscle of the Secret Service. And Elmer Moore was the one that went to each doctor in Parkland and said, don't you ever speak about these wounds for the rest of your life. Elmer Moore, years later in the 90s, will talk to a student in Washington State at a college where he was teaching and say he regretted doing that. He admitted it, regretted it, and said he was under orders from Inspector Thomas Kelly. Now, who pulled Inspector Thomas Kelly's chain? Because Inspector Thomas Kelly, who you may see a photo of, he was at Parkland on the side. He wore a hat, some glasses. He was an older man. We had shown photos of him in previous episodes. He was above the Secret Service. He was an inspector. And Inspector Kelly told Moore to flip the docs. And the doctors were flipped by Moore individually, one by one. And Inspector Kelly did not wake up one day and say, I got to do this. He was ordered by James Rowley, the head of the Secret Service, who was controlled by LBJ. So in other words, LBJ told Rowley to tell Kelly to tell Moore to flip the doctors. Nobody did this on their own. This is a completely insane thing to do. The Secret Service also went around confiscating the visual, video, actual film newsreel footage of these miniature press conferences that were going on in Parkland Hospital. And the footage that you saw has the audio stripped out of it. That's how far the Secret Service went. There's video that you see of the Dr. Perry speaking about the entrance wound, but the audio is stripped out. Ironically, yeah, I wonder how that could happen. However, it says here that there was a Perry in the throat wound. Malcolm Perry was in a unique position, Eric. He made the tracheotomy incision in the throat and inserted the tube. And within an hour, Malcolm Perry was in a classroom in Parkland Hospital. And that's where you see him standing with no words coming out of his mouth, right? So the words, the transcript survived. And they burned it. The Secret Service burned it before they had to go to give it to the Warren Commission. But it did survive. And the transcript of the press conference, in his statement, Malcolm Perry 3 times identifies the throat wound as just seen as an entrance wound. Question from the press, where was the entrance wound? Answer, Malcolm Perry, there was an entrance wound in the neck. Question, which way was the bullet coming on the neck wound? At him? Perry, it appeared to be coming at him. Question, doctor, describe the entrance wound you think from the front of the throat. Perry, the wound appeared to be an entrance wound in the front of the throat. Yes, that is correct. And therein lies the entire case, my friend, because when they flipped Perry and the other doctors, they left out one doctor. And that doctor is the subject of the show today, and that's Charles A. Crenshaw, the guy who wouldn't buckle.
I'm not sure. Is this the footage of that?
That's Malcolm Kilduff. We're going to show that right now. Malcolm Kilduff is the assistant press secretary of the White House because Pierre Salinger is over the Pacific with the cabinet conveniently out of the way. Malcolm Kilduff, this is the guy right here, is going to stand on top of a desk in that same classroom where Dr. Malcolm Perry had the sound stripped out of the transcript that I just read to you. And you're going to see right now Malcolm Kilduff being told and demonstrating to the press what was the cause of death.
Very briefly. It's like a microsecond.
Mm-hmm.
No, it didn't.
It was a simple matter of a bullet right through the head, said Dr. George Berkeley, the White House Medical Office.
Right. So that is a quote from Berkeley to NBC News. A simple matter of a bullet right through the head, which is what Kilduff is pointing to there. There's other footage of Kilduff doing that. That was the tail end of some footage I sent you of Kilduff doing that. I don't know if you have any additional footage, but we do have the Kilduff footage of him standing on the table. It's featured in a number of documentaries.
We'll put it up on Locals later once I can track it down.
The footage is of him pointing to the right temple of JFK, and then of course the famous photo of all the Parkland doctors later demonstrating. There's a color photo of them holding their hand behind where the bullet blew out the back of Kennedy's skull. Okay, so these
We got
all
a couple of them.
right. Here's a few of them, but this is years later. This is there's Crenshaw. If you put that back up on the left, you'll see Crenshaw on the extreme left in the middle of the page. There he is, the middle left. But the rest of these doctors are all showing what they saw that day in the Parkland Trauma Room 1. A couple of them are guys who were at the autopsy, and a couple of ambulance attendants. But nevertheless, we're trying to focus. What's that?
All right. No, I have another one, and I don't know why it's not loading because it's very frustrating. But okay, eventually it might load. Well, thank you, Google Drive.
Okay. Well, the reality of it is, what Crenshaw saw. Crenshaw was not approached by the Warren Commission. Crenshaw was not asked to testify by the Warren Commission. So these other people testified before the Warren Commission. This is not from this is from the House Assassinations Committee, where they're demonstrating. You know, this is 30 years later they're doing this, Eric. 25 years later, in the late 70s. So you're talking about 15 years later. The point of the matter is, just to transition from the Parkland Hospital, how does the body get to Bethesda, right? Because we're going to end up in the Bethesda Naval Hospital, which is not a autopsy. It is a reconstruction project of the head and the body, and I'll explain that in a second. But just to go back a little bit, when we were dealing with the bullet hole in the windshield, Eric, when you and I were in Dallas, when we were talking about the shot to the throat, and people were still challenging whether there was a bullet hole in the windshield. Okay, well, there was a guy from Dearborn. He was the head of security for Dearborn, for Ford Motor Company, for the Dearborn plant, and Lincoln Mercury. His name was Carl Renus. Now, Carl Renus was a guy who came to Washington, took the deathmobile, took the death limo with the bullet hole and the dented chrome molding on the windshield, right? So Carl Renus drove that limo with helicopters flying above him from Washington, D.C. to Cincinnati, Ohio. And in Cincinnati, Ohio, was a company called Hess and Eisenstadt. And Hess and Eisenstadt fixed the molding piece by piece. The limo then goes to Dearborn, where the windshield is replaced, and it's rebuilt as a bulletproof deathmobile, to quote Animal House, the car in Animal House. It's put in with bulletproof plates, and everything is bulletproofed for LBJ. That's why the limo continued, because that car was kept as a souvenir and reinforced on the advice of J. Edgar Hoover for LBJ. J. Edgar Hoover, the famous conversation between the two of them, says that he has a bulletproof car. And LBJ says, shouldn't I have one? He says, yes, certainly. That's why Renus drives the deathmobile to Cincinnati. And that's why the windshield is replaced and ground up and taken to Dearborn, where the whole thing is bulletproofed and rebuilt. Okay, I just want to get that out of the way.
I'm gonna ask this just because it's burning in my head. Mm-hmm. You mentioned Animal House.
Yeah,
I had read somewhere that the final party in Animal House was November 21st, 1963, and it was like symbolic of that was the time before it happened. It was like an insider.
I have to look at the original script. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but
okay.
Getting back to the subject at hand, the situation in Parkland becomes a hostile situation. And you say, well, what happened? There was the pushing and shoving with the body. There was a guy who was Dr. Earl Rose, who was the Dallas County coroner. Again, one of the leading forensic pathologists on that side of the country is Dr. Rose. Dr. Rose is ready to cut open the cranium of JFK and begin the autopsy, which he tells a guy, and this is a new guy that many people have never heard of, so I'm going to put him out there. He's a justice of the peace. His name was Theron Ward. Theron Ward shows up at Parkland at the hospital, and you say, well, why does he show up there? Nobody knows. Nobody knows why Theron Ward shows up there, but he shows up. And here is Rose. Earl Rose is in a fight with Secret Service agent Kellerman over the autopsy of JFK's body. So Rose calls up on the phone to Wade, and he calls up Curry, and he's not getting anywhere. Ward, this judge, calls up Wade, and he tells Wade, we're in a situation here, and Wade tells him to not release the body, right? This is from the DA, the district, Henry Wade. And the same thing happens with the chief of police, Curry. So what does Ward do? He says, thank you very much, and turns the body over to Kellerman, and he points to the exit door and says, there you go. And he is the only legal authority who does this. And Rose has a heart attack saying, are you kidding me? He says, I can have this body out of here in 45 minutes. And apparently Ward is the Secret Service's legal escape valve that allows them to physically take the body based on their interpretation of the law, that this justice of the peace, Theron Ward, a name that no one's ever heard before in the annals of the JFK zeitgeist, this obscure justice of the peace shows up at Parkland and somehow represents some type of law that allows them the cover to take the body. Now, the body still isn't taken that easily because there's scuffling and fighting in the hallway with machine guns out and all kinds of stuff going on. That's Rose over there. That's the county, the DA coroner. Now, he is ready to do the job. And the job is not going to be done by him. And legally, he's obligated to do the job. And he's called Wade and he's made certain phone calls. But getting back into the trauma room event, what happens is they take the body out. These guys are exhausted. They're in the cafeteria. LBJ has fled in the station wagon driven by Chief Curry at high speeds to get back to Air Force One, where he's going to fly to D.C. Now, you say to yourself, where is this body going to go? Body's put in a casket. Crenshaw says they neatly fold up JFK's clothing and put it at the foot of his body in the bronze casket that's brought to the Parkland Trauma Room 1. Okay. Crenshaw is involved in actually lifting the body off of the table into the casket. Now, all of this is going to be, there's going to be a reason for why I'm mentioning all this, because it's going to become apparent in a couple of minutes. Crenshaw helps lift the body, puts in the casket, folds up the clothing, puts it in the foot of the casket, and they seal the casket. They wrap his head with towels, they wrap the body with sheets, and he's good to go, right? So they take him to Air Force One, where the handle breaks off as they're going up the stairs. They're unscrewing the seats to make room for the casket. It weighs 1 million freaking pounds. They carry it up the stairs. And then, LBJ's, all his close friends guard the casket, as we pointed out, including General McHugh, who never leaves the casket for a moment. And LBJ's on board, blah, blah, blah. Fight ensues between General McHugh and the pilot. They don't want to take off because he's waiting for the judge, not this judge, the woman judge, to show up to swear him in. He's on the blower with RFK in D.C. asking for the swearing in words, which he doesn't need because he's already the president, and all that crap that we've covered before. Okay. The plane is sitting there. He's waiting for Sarah Hughes to come and do the oath of office. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, Walter Reed Army Hospital being the ranch, Walter Reed is the #1 forensic hospital, autopsy, everything in the United States. Okay. Everyone assumes he's going to go to Walter Reed. Walter Reed is head and shoulders above every single autopsy facility in the United States, including the military. So Walter Reed is preparing for the arrival of JFK's body. Now, every single top guy, and Cyril Wecht, the guy you interviewed, has pointed out numerous times that his top guys that he knows, were all standing by in New York and Philadelphia. Here's Cyril Wecht. Standing by, the top forensic pathologists in America were within a car ride or a plane flight to Walter Reed within an hour. All of them are standing by on their own because they know that phone's going to ring and they're going to have to go to Walter Reed Army Hospital to do the autopsy. Why? Because they're the top 5 guys in the country. The top 5 guys are calling each other, going, do you get a call? No. You ready to go? No. Okay. And what are we going to do? Right? They're putting a team together. Phone never rings. That phone never rings. The top 5 guys are never called. Who is called is 2 guys named Humes and Boswell. Now, Humes is a guy who is an administrator at the Bethesda Naval Hospital College. Has not done. Here's the 3 guys. There's Boswell's his sidekick on the left. That's Humes in the middle, and we're going to bring in a Colonel Fink, an Army colonel out of Switzerland on the right. Colonel Fink will later testify in the Garrison case in 4 years in 1967 and will be shredded on the witness stand by Garrison and his assistants, but we'll get to that later. Right now, we're looking at Humes in the middle. Humes has never done gunshot autopsies, right? These other guys have done thousands, including Rose in Dallas. Humes has done none, and we're going to get to that in a second. Boswell may have done 1. These are the equivalent of taking a Harvard graduated brain surgeon and replacing him with the president of Harvard. They both have Harvard in common, Eric, but it's the equivalent of taking the president of Harvard and saying, okay, bro, you went to Harvard, right? Yeah. Harvard Medical College? Yeah, I went there.
No, law school. No.
No, you went to Harvard Medical College? Yeah, I did. Okay, what do you do now? I'm the president of Harvard. Good. Put on your gown. You're going to do brain surgery on the president's wife. What? That's right. That's the equivalent of what they're doing. So they take these 2 commanders. One's a commander, the other's a captain, or whoever the higher rank is. I think Humes was a commander. Is a commander higher than a captain?
Yes.
Okay. So.
Wait. Navy. Captain is higher than commander.
Okay. Well, one of them's a captain. The other one's a commander. And then Fink is a colonel, and they really don't like Fink. Fink is brought in because they don't know what the fuck they're doing. They bring in Colonel Fink from the Army. He comes over from Walter Reed because these 2 douchebags don't know what they're doing. Okay, he's a captain here. Humes ends up at a higher rank later in life, obviously.
Yeah.
But he's not the chief autopsy surgeon. He is in this particular case. Okay. So you've got this room full of people, FBI, Secret Service, body comes in. You've got a gallery of 30 to 40 people that Siebert and O'Neill, the 2 FBI agents who are American heroes, couldn't even get them to log in. And in there, we've now learned in that gallery of why they need 30 to 40 men in uniform, brass, with a lot of salad. One of them is a guy named Curtis Bombs Away LeMay, who we pointed out in the previous episode, who will have his own episode eventually, is smoking a giant cigar, blowing smoke rings in celebration of the end of his arch nemesis, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. So LeMay is asked by an orderly to put out the cigar, and he just blows a atomic mushroom cloud of cigar smoke in the orderly's face as an answer. And he goes back to Boswell or Humes, whoever requested it, and said the general has responded negatively, sir. So what they're doing is they're not doing an autopsy. They're doing a reconstruction of Kennedy's skull. Okay. The autopsy ends at midnight, and they are trying to find out what happened with this wound in the front. So they call up Malcolm Perry back in Dallas, and he says, that was an entrance wound, and I did a tracheotomy. And they went, oh, thank you. That is no longer an entrance wound. They call him back 5 freaking times at 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, to reinforce the fact that this is no longer an entrance wound, Eric. Okay? Now, what is it now? Now it's an exit wound. Well, where's the entrance wound? Nobody knows. There is no entrance wound. The entrance wound becomes the right shoulder bullet shot that went in a half an inch in his right shoulder. That will later be moved with a pencil by an obscure congressman named Gerald Ford in the Warren Commission to the back of the neck on the Warren Commission autopsy charts. Okay, because there is no bullet hole in the back of the neck for it to come out the front of the neck. So Ford moves that bullet wound, which only goes in 3/4 of an inch. The pinky of one of the doctors went in there, and that's as far as it went, was with that pinky. So every time they said or attempted to explore these wounds at Bethesda, somebody with a military rank above them came over and said, that'll be enough. Let's move on to the next procedure. This has been fairly well documented by two obscure guys named Siebert and O'Neill, who worked for the FBI. So thank God for these two guys, because there was a guy named Arlen Specter who attempted to destroy their careers during the Warren Commission the following year, because they would not flip either. Siebert and O'Neill would not flip for Arlen Specter. And they recorded the words and the procedures of the doctors as best they could as non-medical personnel, and the dialogue as best they could in their reports for the FBI.
And as we've discussed, the FBI actually did take good reports.
Yeah, well, they were better, and they were assigned the job. They were told to do this. I mean, they were told to get projectiles. That's what they were looking for, was projectiles. However, there's no projectile in the right upper shoulder, and that wound is now moved over a couple of months later, on paper at least, by Gerald Ford. What these guys are doing all night is trying to construct the storyline using the body. Okay. So the brain is like half a brain. We know that, right? So why are they at Bethesda? Bethesda Naval College has two things. It's a college, has hundreds of brains in formaldehyde, has hundreds of bodies on ice. They're wheeling over bodies. They're bringing in brains. They're shooting photos. John Stringer, the autopsy photographer, said he never took these photos. Who takes these photos? A guy named Knutson. Now, why is Knutson brought in there as a photographer? Knutson is the guy who photographed Kennedy and his family on vacations, right? What they wanted was an artistic photographer who could photograph Kennedy to make him look like Kennedy, not an autopsy photographer. That was Stringer. Stringer said that was not the type of film I used. These are not my photos, John Stringer. He was the autopsy photographer at Bethesda. But Knutson, who never spoke his entire life of the event, his wife afterwards, he was a veteran naval man, Eric. Knutson was brought in there and pressured and used as a photographer to recreate and record the actual rebuilding of Kennedy's face and head. Now, how do we know this? I'll tell you why. The autopsy ended at midnight, but Humes and Boswell stayed till 5 in the freaking morning, by their own admission, reconstructing the face. That's what they said they were doing. And they brought in a guy from the local mortuary. Why? Because they were reconstructing the face. That's what they were doing. And that's why Knutson was taking photos. And he kept looking at the lens of his camera to see if the Kennedy face looked intact. And looked like, look at Kennedy face. Now, if the bullet, which they said the bullet entrance wound to the head that they came up with, was in back of the skull where the cowlick is, Eric. In your case, no cowlick. But if you had a cowlick, it would be back there. And they said it was a tiny little entrance wound in the back top of the skull. See that thing on the right up there? Nobody ever saw this. Nobody ever saw this because it didn't exist. This is where the Oswald bullet goes through the head, right up there on the right. Now, if that's the case, it would have blown out the entire face, because the reverse would have happened. The shot went in through the right temple from the right-hand side from the grassy knoll, and he blows out the back of his skull. That's just physics. If this is true, then this little bullet or whatever size bullet this is, goes through the head and blows out the face, which they claim they reconstructed that face. But nobody's ever saw the face blown out. There's a problem, because 26 people in the Parkland Hospital saw a completely intact face with a little tiny hole over here, which is the entrance wound from the picket fence where Eric and I stood in Dallas looking at that chip shot where the X was that went right into Temple, blew out the back of his head. Okay. So these guys are trying desperately. There's the trach wound again. The trach.
The face. is intact.
Right.
I'm just showing it for the face.
Right. The face is completely intact. So what this was that night, why they're in Bethesda, not Walter Reed, is because this is not an autopsy. This is a reconstruction of a mannequin and taking photos of an art project. They put the brain and everything is gone. It's all scattered around, right? So you just go, wow, there's parts of the skull are missing in the back. A kid, a medical student, the next day on November 23rd is walking where we were, Eric, right where the X is, and he looks down, a medical student in Dallas, and he sees a triangular fragment of skull. And that kid's name was Billy Harper. That's Billy Harper. And that's the famous Harper fragment, which is about 3 inches by 2.5 inches, a triangle piece of skull that would fit right into this giant hole that's in the back of his head. So that fragment becomes a problem, because if that fragment is part and fits, which Siebert and O'Neill handled that fragment, they gave it to Admiral Berkeley, the personal physician for Kennedy. And there was no chain of custody after Admiral Berkeley had disappeared. It was gone, right? Now, Berkeley attempted over the years to confess, and he made attempts to reach out to the JFK research community on 3 occasions. He's also on film at the JFK Library of Massachusetts, asked about the assassination and refusing to talk about it. Okay, this is a medical doctor. This is essentially the Surgeon General of the United States, right? And his personal physician reaching out 3 times to JFK research community saying there's more to the story. I have to talk to you about it. And they going, okay, bring it on, doc. Then he changes his mind. 6 months later, he says, I got to talk to you guys. I go, okay, we're ready. Changes his mind, right? Then he dies. His daughter does the same thing. And they get to his daughter and the records are destroyed. So the reason they're in Bethesda, it's a college. It's got brains. It's got the Navy. It's got Admiral Berkeley, who's the highest ranking guy in that room. Berkeley leaves early to go with the Kennedys. He splits. He splits like 9 o'clock at night. The autopsy, which is not an autopsy, like I said, it's a reconstruction of the head, goes till midnight. And then by their own admission, there's blood on the notes of Dr. Humes. Now, what does Dr. Humes do? What does he care if there's some blood on the notes? He burns the notes. And he says he burns the notes because, now this is the craziest explanation of all. Humes burns his autopsy notes, which are medical evidence, legal evidence, historical evidence, autopsy evidence. He says he burns them because there was blood on the chair of Lincoln after the assassination. And
okay, it's insane.
Okay, and he didn't want there to be a spectacle of blood on the notes of his medical notes in a book somewhere. In other words, they're grasping at straws. They're grasping at straws. Turns out it wasn't even blood on the chair. It was the oil from Lincoln's hair. Just to set the record straight, there was no blood on the chair. But this is how far they went to come up with a cock and bull explanation for burning his freaking notes, right? Now, you say, well, what does this have to do with Charles Crenshaw? Good question, Hunley. That's why you're Hunley. So getting back to Charles Crenshaw, Crenshaw denies and will not cooperate with the flipping of the doctors. Crenshaw says this is an entrance wound, this is an entrance wound, and refuses to cooperate. So Crenshaw must be destroyed. You know the rules, Hunley. Okay, cut to 1991. The movie comes out, JFK. Crenshaw writes a book, and the book he writes is JFK Conspiracy of Silence. This book here, I don't know if you can see it, JFK Conspiracy of Silence. So that's a small book. Goes on the bestseller list of the New York Times paperback list, and it becomes an issue, right? He then does press for the book. He goes on Geraldo. I don't know if you have any video of him on Geraldo. He goes on 2020 with Barbara Walters, the same show we showed the Abby Hoffman stuff on, Barbara Walters 2020 on ABC News. And they make a big deal out of Crenshaw because Crenshaw was in trauma room 1. And we're going to get to that in a second. But let's go back to trauma room number 2, Hunley, while you futz around over there.
I'm trying to find video.
No, I'm kidding.
Keep up with you.
Yeah. So trauma room 2, what goes on in trauma room 2? Well, trauma room 2 all of a sudden gets a new patient. A new patient gets wheeled in on Sunday afternoon, and his name is Lee Harvey Oswald. Now, who do they contact to deal with this? Charles Crenshaw. So Crenshaw comes in and comes back into the thing, and he makes the decision, do not put him in trauma room 1 where JFK died. That would be too bizarre. So Crenshaw, they all look at Crenshaw and they go, thank you. They're about to wheel him in to trauma room 1. And Crenshaw says, put him in trauma room 2. So they bring Oswald into trauma room 2. And he's clearly, well, that's him being wheeled out of trauma room 2. that didn't work out. But yeah, that's a couple of an hour later or so.
Okay, well, here, this is sooner.
Well, that's even 2 hours later. That you can see the Palmolive dish soap in the back there. That's at the morgue.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, thank you for that, Hunley. But anyway, so
you're welcome.
Bringing him in, he is alive now. The shot by Ruby goes through. It's not just a random shot by Ruby. This is a gangster shot with a gangster death grip, by the way, on the revolver, which we mentioned in the Ruby episode. By the way, it later became revealed that for 8 months, Jack Ruby was an informant for the FBI when he was in Chicago. This is, him after he was shot, right? This is Oswald after he shot, right? Okay. So he's wheeled into that ambulance from the police station. He's taken to Parkland, and he's put into trauma room 2 by Charles Crenshaw. Now, Charles Crenshaw is feverishly working with Perry again. The same guys. It's the same guys. They are, working to keep Oswald alive. So what are they doing? They're injecting his heart. They're doing heart massages. Perry again. He's doing the electric volts on the chest. They're putting in tubes into Oswald. But the shot by Ruby was so strategically placed that it went through every single organ in his body in a row. It wasn't a random shot. It was a shot that is taught among gangsters on how to really eliminate a guy. And it's a gut shot, but it goes through everything. Okay. So they open them up, they look, and they just go, every single organ's got a hole in it, right? They take the bullet out and they give the bullet to the FBI. So inside of the trauma room 2 are 2 guys. One guy is in a green smock. They give him a mask, and he's got his gun sticking out of the back of his pants. As a Secret Service agent. The other guy's an FBI agent, and they're there to take a deathbed confession if Oswald regains consciousness. Just so you understand this at home. This is very rarely discussed in any documentary, so this is some new ground here. The phone rings, and outside the phone, somebody comes in and says to Crenshaw, there's a phone call for you. And Crenshaw goes out from this hectic surgery of keeping this man alive, complete chaos in trauma room 2, and he hears the following on the phone. This is Lyndon B. Johnson, boy. Who is this? And the guy says, who? And he says, this is the President Lyndon B. Johnson, screaming into the phone, according to Crenshaw. And he says, this is Dr. Crenshaw working. And he says, is the accused, he says accused assassin. He doesn't say assassin. He says accused assassin, LBJ, as Crenshaw describes. He says, is the accused assassin alive? And he said, yes. And he's not doing very well, sir. And he says, I have a man in there who is going to take a death. This is what LBJ tells Crenshaw on the phone. He says, I have a man in there who is prepared to take a deathbed confession from the accused assassin if he confesses. And he says, I want you to give him whatever ability you can. So Crenshaw goes in, tells this to Perry and McClellan, and they're like, what? Like, they're just like, up to their arms in blood. You know what I mean? Trying to save this guy. And they don't even understand what it even means. But they all look over, they stop, and they look over. There's the guy with the gun. And he comes over, and this is where it's interesting. He keeps bending over, the FBI guy, yelling into Oswald's ear at the top of his lungs, did you do it? did you do it? And they're like, dude, you got to get out of our way here. And he just keeps, then he backs off. Then they work, blood, all kinds of things shooting up in the air. And the guy comes back in. I mean, think about the proximity of this. He's leaning over into Oswald's ear with this crowd of 10 surgeons around him yelling, did you do it? Did you do it? This is the chaos created by LBJ. Now, LBJ is obviously wants whatever recorded words he can get, because LBJ, he doesn't want Oswald saying, yes, and LBJ told me to, or something crazy. You know what I mean, Eric?
Yeah. Wow.
But whatever he says, he wants recorded by this this FBI agent. So
I have some footage of him. I don't know if this is where he's talking about it or not, but
okay, go ahead. Let's see what you got.
Emergency room, and there was bedlam, total bedlam. People were running in, people were crying.
Did President Kennedy have any vital signs when you reached?
He had barely a pulse. He had an agonal respiration. He had no blood pressure whatsoever.
Did you see the tide, his life in effect, running out?
Yes. However, God love him, Malcolm Perry. He didn't want him to die as much as all of us. He started closed chest massage, pumping on his chest, trying to make him come back or resuscitate the heart.
After the medical team had done their best, had worked as hard as they could and realized it was hopeless, was there time for tears among those who had put so much emotion and effort into this?
Just before the cleanup really started, there was blood and bandages on the floor. His back brace was askewed on the wall. I think it got to me most when I looked and saw the red roses of Mrs. Kennedy in the kick bucket there at the head of the table. And there his blood was still dripping on it.
Wow.
I felt helpless. I wished we could have done more. I mean, here we had trained all our lives and we'd lost the President of the United States, and nobody wanted to be around.
I don't think I can say much more than that.
Yeah, no, I know. Well, the reason that is important, and it's going to come up right now, this part of the story, is when his book came out, which is what he's promoting the book there, which was he had a couple of extra writers on it, but it goes into some of this macabre, his own feelings of how it meant to him to see this guy, and he talks about it on this show, and he talks about it on 2020 with Barbara Walters. Okay. So this is why it's relevant today, because it's kind of like the COVID medical stuff that we just went through with the experts on COVID and the Journal of American Medical Association and the AMA denouncing doctors who did not believe in the COVID description that came forth. So a lot of doctors had their licenses threatened. This is the back shot, by the way, in the upper right hand, that that Ford will now move to the back of the neck to traverse out of that tracheotomy entrance wound. So that is a bullet wound that comes from behind, by the way, I believe from the Dow Tex building, as many people believe. It's a flat line trajectory shot with possibly an underloaded bullet to reduce the volume of the sound using a suppressor. A couple of us believe that. Half load, and there are some experts who've contacted Eric and I about this particular military style of using a suppressor with a lower load volume bullet, with almost like a meat shot, Eric, that's left. I don't know what happened to the shell, but clearly that wound only goes in a half to 3/4 of an inch, and we know that because the surgeons put their pinky in there. So that becomes the back wound of the neck that comes out the front, that goes through Connolly's shoulder, that goes through Connolly's chest, that goes through
the magic bullet.
That becomes $3.99, right? So that dog of a bullet went from a half an inch and not traversing to the back of his neck, coming out his throat, making all these zigzag moves, going through Connolly, going through his ribs, going through his chest, going through his arm, going through his wrist, into his thigh, blah, blah, blah. That's $3.99. So that's the crazy Arlen Specter magic bullet theory. So we know that's not true. We also know that he was hit from the front on both of those shots. And that's what Charles Crenshaw refused to buckle on as a medical doctor. So he, because of his stature, he goes on to become the head of a medical center in Fort Worth. He becomes a hospital administrator. He becomes the head surgeon in Fort Worth Hospital. He has a career, but for 30 years, Eric, he says nothing. From 1963 to 1993, 1992, when the book came out, he says nothing. And the film comes out, which allows them, the Oliver Stone film, the window of opportunity to add more meat on that bone. So when he came out with the book and said this, the Journal of the American Medical Association went to work to destroy him. And that's
kind of like Noguchi or Thomas Noguchi or whatever later. Destroy the reputation of anybody that doesn't.
Also like Fauci going after the doctors who were Malone and everyone else. It was the same exact thing during our recent COVID thing. It was the exact same scenario, only it was in 1992. And the Journal of the American Medical Association had a lot more gravitas than it does now. So they hired this guy, Daniel Brio, to write, Dennis Brio, I take it back, to write 2 articles in a row to destroy Charles Crenshaw. And they went and they rounded up the 4 doctors. Now, keep in mind, this is Dr. Charles Baxter. This is Dr. Malcolm Perry. This is Dr. Jim Carrico and Dr. Marion Jenkins. These are 4 friends, quote unquote, of Charles Crenshaw. 4 allies, 4 friends. Keep in mind, Malcolm Perry was right in back of him in school. It's one of his best friends, Malcolm Perry, who said, that footage you were showing, by the way, was Perry speaking without the words. What you were just showing, that's from the press conference where he says it's an entrance wound to the throat. They seized those from the 2 local Dallas news stations. Okay, so they write this article. It's called JFK's Death, The Plain Truth, from the medical doctors who did the autopsy. So they contact the 4 doctors and they attempt to say the following. And I'll just read you a little bit of it. This is written, and the editor is George Lundberg, who's a medical doctor. He's the JAMA editor, but it's written by Dennis L. Brio. So the bullets came from above and behind. This is the quote from the intro to the article. The scientific evidence, now keep in mind, this is 1992, May 27th, rare copy of the JAMA article, which I'm going to put up on Locals when we're done with this. This is a really rare copy of it. The scientific evidence they documented during their autopsy provides irrefutable proof, Eric, that President Kennedy was struck by only 2 bullets that came from above and behind from a high-velocity weapon that caused the fatal wounds. Okay? The autopsy proof, combined with the bullet and rifle evidence found at the scene of the crime, and the subsequent detailed documentation of a 6-month investigation involving the enormous resources of the local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies, proves the 1964 commission conclusion that Kennedy was killed by a lone assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald. This is the opening of the article. Okay. And then Hume says, he calls it probably the least secret autopsy in the history of the world, because you always burn your notes with the least secret autopsy in history of the world. Crenshaw's book, he goes on, this is from the article. Crenshaw's book is only the latest in a long parade of conspiracy theories purporting to tell how Kennedy was really killed, including the 1991 release of Oliver Stone's film JFK. Okay. A foolproof finding. He concludes, quote, in 1963, we proved that the autopsy table, this is from Hume's, we proved at the autopsy table that President Kennedy was struck from above and behind by the fatal shot. The pattern of the entrance and exit wounds in the skull proves it. And if we stayed here until hell freezes over, nothing will change this proof. It happens 100 times out of 100, and I will defend it until the day I die. This is the essence of our autopsy, and it is supreme ignorance to argue any other scenario. This is a law of physics, Eric, and it is foolproof, absolutely, unequivocally, and without question, says Humes. Okay, he goes on to say about the front entrance wound. There was an abrasion collar, quote unquote, I don't even know what that means, where this bullet entered at the base of the president's neck, meaning, and back here. Now dig what the guy does, because he needs to muddle in terms of verbal storyline. He needs to muddle this a little bit. So he says there was an abrasion collar where this bullet entered at the base of the president's neck, and this scorching and splitting of the skin from the heat and scraping generated by the entering bullet is proof that it entered from behind. Okay, so he goes, dig this, man, dig this. Still, the other scenario continued to be painted. Recently, Humes noted, there were about 300 people, Eric, at a convention in Dallas, where Eric and I will go later. Humes notes, this is Humes saying this. This is why he's saying Crenshaw is a fraud. In a medical article, he says there were about 300 people at a convention in Dallas, each hawking a different conspiracy theory about how the president was killed. I think this kind of general idiocy is a tragedy. It almost defies belief, but I guess it is the price that we pay, Hunley, for living in a free country. I can only question the motives of those who propound these ridiculous theories for a price and who have turned the president's death into a profit-making industry.
Well, then.
Right. I mean, this is kind of interesting. It talks about how it was supposed to go. Remember I said it was supposed to go to Walter Reed? He says, early in the afternoon, we received a call from Dr. Bruce Smith from AFIP. That's the Walter Reed, the Army forensics, which is located 5 miles away at the Walter Reed Army Medical Center. After all, the AFIP was the apex of military pathology and perhaps world pathology. This is him himself saying this. And somehow at the last minute, it switched to Bethesda.
Wow.
Fatal wounds blatantly obvious. The pathologist found 2 wounds from a high-velocity missile that would later be matched to the military-jacketed bullets fired from above and behind the president by Lee Harvey Oswald. The fatal shot entered the back of the president's skull and exploded away almost a 6-inch section of the right side of Kennedy's head. The second bullet entered the base of the neck, but its exit track was not immediately apparent. This is a total lie, of course. Anyway, to make a long story short, here's the quote I was telling you about. Humes and Boswell had remained at the morgue until 5 that morning, helping. This is the two guys, the two main guys. They're done at midnight, right? Humes and Boswell remained at the morgue until 5 a.m. that morning, helping to embalm the president's body. Humes says, quote, we were able to almost perfectly restore the president's appearance, and local funeral home brought out a beautiful mahogany casket to replace the bronze one from Dallas. Why these guys are doing this cosmetic work on this guy, like their funeral attendants, is an explanation. Odd. Come on, Hunley. Come on. That's a little odd, my friend.
For sure.
I just want to read this because Barnes mentioned Jack Valenti the other day, right? And we had mentioned Jack Valenti being one of the aides to LBJ that he used as a human footstool on numerous occasions. When he had a chair that had no footstool, he would order Jack Valenti to kneel as a human footstool in front of the chair, and then he would put his feet up on the back of Jack Valenti, which most people do. So Jack Valenti becomes the head of the Motion Picture Association of America, the MPAA. His daughter, Courtney Valenti, to this day, is the head of Warner Brothers Pictures, which is kind of interesting, who may or may not be his daughter, because there's some scuttlebutt as to who the real father was to Courtney Valenti, Jack Valenti's daughter. Okay, dig this. JFK, Jack Valenti. Now, Jack Valenti, this is a film, JFK, which Warner Brothers, the studio, he represents Warner Brothers. He represents the Motion Picture Association of America in Washington as the chief lobbyist. And Barnes was talking about Christopher Dodd. This was about Kim.com, Eric. Kim.com, that's the guy?
Kim.com, yeah.
Kim.com down in New Zealand got arrested because Chris Dodd, the guy who succeeds Valenti, uses his democratic powers as a former senator from Connecticut. We're getting a little off track here, but I'll get back on track in a second. The Connecticut senator, Christopher Dodd, uses his powers and threatens to the New Zealand regarding this situation with Kim.com, and they go after him because of political pressure from the Motion Picture Association of America and Hollywood because of Mega Upload claiming that he was uploading these films, and Barnes talks a little bit more about it in the case than I will. But however, just to read you a thing about his opinion of JFK, the movie, Jack Valenti's opinion of a movie with numerous Oscar nominations, making a ton of money for Warner Brothers, and he represents Warner Brothers. This is his opinion of the film. Jack Valenti, former aide to President Lyndon Johnson and the current president of the Motion Picture Association of America, recently described JFK as based on the, quote, hallucinatory bleedings of an author named Jim Garrison, a discredited former district attorney in New Orleans. He also calls it a hoax, a smear, and pure fiction, rivaling the Nazi propaganda films of Leni Riefenstahl. That's from Jack Valenti comparing Oliver Stone to the Nazi documentarian woman who made Triumph of the Will, Leni Riefenstahl. It's one of the great quotes of all time.
Well, why stop halfway if you can get all the way there?
Right. And you remember George Will, the syndicated columnist, conservative. George Will called the film JFK as a cartoon history by Stone, who is 45 going on 8. In his in his 3-hour lie, Stone falsifies so much he may be an intellectual sociopath indifferent to the truth. These are considered the top columnists and spokespeople of the deep state. But anyway, I just wanted to read some of that and get that on the record, because what happens next is really interesting. This article says that Crenshaw was not there. This article says among these 4 guys, they all lie, say Crenshaw was not even in the room. They want to totally Stalinize him and wipe him out of American history. They say his book is a fraud, he is a fraud, and he was not even there. Okay? That's a little much, Eric. That's a little much. Let's see if there's anything here. Here's his best friend, Perry, Malcolm Perry. When I first heard about Crenshaw's claims, I was considering a lawsuit. But after I saw Charles on TV one day, all my anger melted. It was so pathetic to see him on TV saying this bogus stuff to reach out for his day in the sun that I ended up feeling sorry for himself. Crenshaw says that the rest of us are part of a conspiracy of silence, and he withheld his information for 29 years because of a fear his career would be ruined. Well, if he really felt he had valuable information and kept it secret for all those years, I find that despicable. It's kind of interesting. Crenshaw also claims in his book to have received a telephone call, Eric, from President Lyndon Baines Johnson asking him to extract a confession from the dying Lee Harvey Oswald. Baxter responds, this is Dr. Baxter, quote, "Did that happen? Heavens, no. Imagine the President of the United States personally calls Chuck Crenshaw." Is that Baxter?
Yeah.
Yeah, what a scumbag this guy is. Okay. So these 2 guys and the other 2 guys go on to smear in these 2 articles Charles Crenshaw, right? So what does Crenshaw do? He sues the Journal of the American Medical Association in a defamation slander suit, and he wins.
Oh,
That's right. He wins over nearly $500,000, close to $750,000 in damages, and they pay.
That is a hard win, by the way.
Yeah.
And the only way you're going to pull off, I mean, the number one defense for defamation is truth.
Right. Okay.
So they lost.
Here is the truth, written by Charles Crenshaw himself in a 6,800 word piece for the case. And we'll put this on Locals also. It's confidential. It's a letter of 1993. Crenshaw writes, and this is brilliant. Apparently, these doctors testified to the Warren Commission. All 4 of these doctors said what Crenshaw said to the Warren Commission.
Oh, Jesus.
And he uses their own words as evidence of them lying in the article.
Ooh.
Ooh. Bring it on, Barnes. This is a good one. We got to bring this.
So you actually got value out of the Warren Commission for once.
Right. So he uses their own words. And then this woman, he says right here, he quotes the same line, Dr. Baxter, did that happen? Heavens, no. Imagine the president of the United States personally calls Chuck Crenshaw, right? Okay, here's Dr. Williams, Dallas neurosurgeon, told the New York Times, quote, I vividly remember someone in the White House calling President Johnson wants to know what the status of Oswald. This is another surgeon right next to him. I heard the statement in the operating room, and it was Charles Crenshaw. Anyone who would revive my thoughts about this, I have said this for years. Okay, so they have a woman. Her name is Miss Phyllis Bartlett. Now, Miss Phyllis Bartlett, you say, who is that, Eric? Who is Miss Phyllis Bartlett? She was the phone receptionist at Parkland. And you know who she picked up the phone to hear? Lyndon Baines Johnson, the president of the United States. I want to talk to the head surgeon, dagnabbit. So she says, okay, what does she do? She writes a letter to the Dallas Morning News. And in that letter, Phyllis Bartlett was the chief telephone operator at Parkland Hospital that day. She definitely remembers taking the call from the President Johnson, then transferring it to the operating room. She was attempting to transfer the president public relations office. That was very definitely was a phone call of the President Johnson himself, and he was connected to the operating room during Oswald's surgery. Okay. And anyway, he goes on in this document to use their own words against them and wins the lawsuit against JAMA and against the editor of JAMA, who will be fired within the year, Lundquist. And the point that this is relevant today is because what we went through with COVID and Malone and everyone else in the past 2 years with JAMA. That's why it's important. That's why I wanted to do this episode, because in 1992, they did the same thing and they got caught and they had to pay the piper. And Crenshaw was vindicated by the lawsuit, and he shouldn't have had to have gone through all that trouble, but he did because of the deep state.
And hopefully the other doctors were mocked, but they probably just skated out on the side. You know, they got their
they lived
in the CIA check, and
they lived in the shadows for the rest of their lives. And that's why I mentioned early on about Malcolm Perry with that doctor up in Washington State, the other surgeon. He worked in a small hospital, Perry, I don't know how small it was, but he worked in a hospital up in Washington State where this doctor asked him repeatedly about the entrance wound until one night he fessed up and said it was an entrance wound. And a couple of months later, he was called before the Assassination's Record Review Board and lied again under oath, literally a week after he told his doctor privately that it was an entrance wound. He literally told him, finally, it was an entrance wound. This guy right here then testified again under oath that it was an exit wound. That's how much he lived in fear of the deep state, of taking his, as Barnes points out, credentialism away. Because that thing hanging in back of his head, you see that thing back there? That is more important than the American history, the truth, the murder of the president, every freaking thing. That document is more important to this scumbag than every single thing of the United States, the history of the United States and the murder of a president. That's how powerful and greedy these cunts are. I mean, it's astounding astounding how that credentialism can strangle a man. And which Robert talks about with his father. And, I've heard it from other doctors during COVID, how they.
Well, hold on, Peter. What's it? Peter McCullough?
McCullough, Malone.
No, but I mean, he's literally been removed.
Yeah. Oh,
from,
yeah.
He's not eligible to be a surgeon. So
yeah.
It's real. The
Oh,
threat
no.
to him is real.
I'm not saying it's not real. I am saying that at some point, you got to buck up. I mean, like Crenshaw did.
Amazing.
It is an amazing story. And Crenshaw is an American hero. And Malcolm Perry lives in the shadows as a scurrilous rat who didn't have the courage of his original convictions when he said that it was an entrance wound into the throat of the president. Wow. If Perry had not buckled, we may have had a completely different American history to this day. If the people like Perry had had the courage of their convictions to not buckle, we may have not had to go through this, 50 years, 60 years of this crap.
Amazing.
It is an amazing, amazing story. I have to tell you right now. And Crenshaw, the reason I wanted to celebrate Crenshaw is that he is a true American hero, Charles Crenshaw, for what he did. And the amount of stuff that he had to put up with, and the vindication of Crenshaw, and the rising from the ashes, like a phoenix of his, resurgence, and having the courage. He didn't need the money for the book, Eric. You know what I mean? A lot of guys have written books about Kennedy who need the money. He did not need the money. He did not need the fame. He didn't need anything. He stuck his neck out, and they almost killed him.
Amazing. Wow.
That's an American hero.
Well, on that note, you're going to be putting some of this stuff up on Locals. I actually have a PDF copy of Crenshaw's book. I'll put it up on Locals later.
It's not a big book. There's also a follow-up book called Trauma Room 1 that he wrote. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit more meaty. I don't know if that's out there. People want to get that book. But I'd recommend both of these books, Trauma Room 1 and the original Conspiracy of Silence. Two really good books about the assassination from a medical point of view.
And I'll put it up on Locals for free because I found it out there for free. So
okay,
it'll be on there for free. You can always go to our Locals, unstructured.locals.com. You can join it for free. You don't have to support us, but it does really help us to get the numbers so we can keep in touch with you.
Can they subscribe there, or they subscribe somewhere else?
They can follow us for free, and if they like it, they can pay to support us, and there'll be even more content because some of the content you put up will probably be behind the paywall. But like the book, I'm going to put that up so it's free, and we also are simultaneously streaming this to Locals right now. There's a separate chat in there if you don't like the noise. This chat here is so busy it had to go into slow mode because there's just so much.
I don't want to say anything, but this content is not anywhere else, people. And most of you cats who found this are really addicted to it, and we appreciate that. But there's all kinds of crap on the internet and YouTube and all kinds of stuff, but it never really goes anywhere. It's like the same stuff regurgitated over and over again. I mean, each week Eric and I have given you like stuff that nobody has ever heard of. Nobody knows about this justice of the peace I was talking about named Ward. I mean, this is stuff that, it's taken me 50 years to dig out of the books and dig out of documents. And, everybody is really enjoying it, but don't take it for granted is all I'm saying.
For sure. But you know what? We have people who are not taking it for granted. We have a Rumble rant that I saw that came in. Yeah. Hold on. Rumble rant. I've got to go through my 5,000 windows to find where I am.
Right.
Rumble rant from Krabby T. Girth. Great name.
Greatest name in the history of Rumble.
Is this the first draft of Invasion of the Body Snatchers?
What do you mean?
That's the rant. That was the comment. I'm guessing it's about the movement of the body and whatever else is going on.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Right. No, look, I mean, David Lifton wrote a perfectly fascinating 900-page book, not to begrudge Lifton, but my opinion and the opinion of D. Eugenio and the opinion of Oliver Stone and some of the others is that none of that was really necessary, because if you take them to Bethesda, you've got everything you need. You know what I mean? You don't need Tippett's body. You don't need extra bodies in body bags. You don't need to fly different things. I mean, it is what it is. It's Occam's razor in a lot of ways. The simplicity of what they're doing is not an autopsy, but a reconstruction operation.
Definitely. And let's see, with us, we have some super chats that have been coming in while we've been going.
Alert, super chat, alert.
Sir Lawrence, how come in his Twitter photo, Mark looks like Mickey Rourke, but on YouTube videos, he looks like Bob Dole?
That's an interesting comment. Really, really profound.
Thanks.
Really profound.
All right.
Totally hip comment. Bravo.
All right. I've got a new member, Pamela Clifton's Videos and Music. Thank you very much. We actually have over 200 members on YouTube. I don't know how to say that name, but thank you very much for the new membership. It's in Cosma 79.
What?
Never fear, Stool Purger is here from Australia, it looks like.
Interesting.
Thank you. See, hey, they're keeping up, Mark. This is YouTube, not Rumble, so they can have odd usernames too.
Oh, right. Good point.
Sparty Matt, regular. You guys are awesome. Thanks for the knowledge and entertainment, and thank you. We have Pasha, special request.
Oh,
Yiddish word of the day that is related to Valentine's Day. If you can do this, Mark, I promise not to do the singing telegram.
let me see. Related to Valentine's Day. Let me see. All I could say is Liebe, which means love. You know,
That's good enough.
Ich liebe dich. I love you.
Okay.
Ich liebe dich, Hanley. Ich liebe
Somehow it sounds obscene.
I'm in rehearsal right now for later tonight.
I see. Okay. You're doomed. Is there a realistic chance of having LBJ's legal or psychiatric records released?
Well, I presume that they were destroyed. I don't think anybody's holding on.
He
to
doesn't
it.
seem like he would sit in a room and see a psychiatrist.
Well, no, I
anyway.
think what he actually, just to address that briefly, they hired a psychiatrist out of Austin because they were afraid that he was going to spill the beans when he went crazy at the end of his life, when he was on the ranch holding press conferences with the Mexican-American ranch hands that he treated like his cabinet. This is true. I mean, I think McGovern showed up and he thought he was the president of Germany, prime minister of Germany.
Wow.
Yeah, no, he was gone. So the lawyer, his muscle lawyer, the guy who ran Austin, hired a psychiatrist to go and interview him on a number of sessions to see what he would reveal to the psychiatrist, not to help him, but almost like to make sure he didn't spill the beans. And that psychiatrist, I assume, was killed immediately afterwards. He signed a bunch of non-disclosure agreements, the shrink. But as for those records, I doubt that they exist. Let me put it that way.
Great.
But there was a psychiatrist. There actually was a psychiatrist.
Good times. Chris Wolney. It's a center mass gut shot intended to strike the descending aorta or inferior vena cava.
Yes.
Death is fast due to mass bleeding. That's the
correct.
Oswald shot.
Yes, that is correct. Thank you.
Trenton Paul. Chuckle. Thank you.
Okay.
Michael, thank you for never buckling. Keep bringing out the truth to people.
And we're going to keep going as long as they have. We run out of characters at some point, but it seems.
Oh, we got RFK. We got other characters. There's more to come. Super sticker from Matthew West. Thank you.
Well, when the cards come out, we'll have a bunch of characters.
Oh yeah. Sparty Matt, thanks for the pick me up. I teach at a junior high. And
Right.
What? Oh my God! 2 students with heart attacks this week.
Right. Yeah. There it is.
I don't even want to.
It's going to go down as the biggest medical debacle in human history. Back at you, Mark. Hey, Dankeschön, Pasha.
And Billy Langford. 2 questions. Jack Lawrence and the Tom Dillard photo of the 6th floor. I don't.
There was nobody up on the 6th floor. I think most of us agree. This was a staging area. It was an area designed to be built into a sniper's nest. When Bonnie Ray Williams is eating his lunch up there, his chicken sandwich with the bone in it, and drinking his Dr. Pepper, smoking his menthol cigarettes, the Warren Commission tried to move Bonnie Ray Williams off of that floor, and he just kept fighting them. they said, "Didn't you leave at 2:10?" And he said, "No, I was there almost till the arrival of the president." And they wanted to have as much time to have a sniper get into position when Bonnie Ray Williams left that 6th floor window as humanly possible. And there was nobody up there other than the people staging the events soon afterwards.
All right. Well, we were just talking about the late Oswald, and we have our own Oswald.
Oh, look at him. He's got brown on his face, and he kind of looks like the one in the autopsy.
Oh, you're so rude. He will make it to Las Vegas, but
when are we going to Vegas? March 13th or something?
The event's March 12th.
March 12th. Okay. Right. Well, you're going to go like the 10th or 11th or something, right?
Yeah, I'll be there a couple days earlier, but
well, can other people come and meet us, or what do we? It's just
I think I encourage everybody be on locals, and I will discuss whatever we can come up with, and if there's people in town, what have you. Somehow I'll try to meet up with people. I mean, everything's sold out so fast. I feel kind of bad about the situation.
It's sold out in 5 seconds.
No, it was a little longer than that. 2 minutes.
Oh,
that's what you call a distinction without a difference.
I speak in editorial terminology. These semantical people on the spectrum go 5 seconds. It could have been 5 seconds.
No, but like I said, that is what we call a distinction without a difference.
Right. Okay, thank you.
But
I think it'll be fun, so we'll hopefully see people on Friday. What do we got Friday?
Friday, we have Freeform Friday. Again, we're doing Freeform Friday every week.
We got some Baldwin information that I uncovered yesterday that I think
I sent you something too. So
yeah, I saw that. Yeah, there's some more stuff. I'll talk to you after the show in the privacy using the cone of silence, Max, from Agent 86. Control says we must use the cone of silence.
But it won't be tonight because I have
you got to go do your thing.
And I need to survive. So
right. Yeah, I got to do something too. So
everybody go have a happy Valentine's Day.
Right.
Be it the one you love or the one
you're with.
Love the one you're with. And we'll see you Friday.